Welcome to the third episode of Just Candid, an entrepreneurship knowledge series hosted by Chitkara University. We are on episode 3 today, and we have with us a serial entrepreneur who lives in the UK but has created an impact globally, Mr. Dan Sandhu. Dan, welcome to the third episode of Just Candid.
Pleasure to be here, thank you.
So Dan, tell us about yourself.
There's not a lot to tell. I've been in business for many years. I started off as a professional and then I set up businesses in technology and outsourcing, both in the UK and in India, and then most recently in technology, particularly in education technology. I've been very interested in that sector.
You've been an expert and an icon in the edtech field, education and technology. What are your present thoughts? How do you see edtech startups coming up, and what way should they go to sustain and become successful?
I think education is a fascinating sector, education technology particularly. For me, it's around understanding what best enables the educators without undermining them or overpowering them. So making sure the beneficiary, that is a learner, sits at the heart of every technology. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. Both in the UK, India and internationally, the challenges are very similar. The opportunities are very similar. How do you drive better outcomes so that the technology enables better learning? How do you deploy technology to support the educator without making the technology so overpowering that they don't want to adopt it? So yes, the range of possibilities are endless, from virtual reality gaming to artificial intelligence deployment to identifying technology to help serve the skills gap.
So out of the startups you invested in, startups you mentored, startups which came your way, which one of them or two of them you feel you really enjoyed working?
I think there's a number of them which have done really well. If I look at those where I'm involved in India, which I think is most relevant for your audience, Youth for Work is an assessment-based technology based in Delhi. They focus very much on allowing people to understand their own skills, thereby understanding what is required to deliver that specific skills quotient that India needs. They're working widely with sector skill councils in India across multiple sectors to support that skills gap development, to support the development of individuals so they can get better employability. The challenges are global. The challenges about unemployment, the challenges around skills gap are similar everywhere. But I think Youth for Work has found a particular niche, and they've done a great job over the last 3 years, over 1.5 million users across India, working with numerous companies and government organizations and colleges, including Chitkara. I'm aware of that. I'm proud of that team, and they've done a great job.
Two major changes came into the global economy. One was Brexit in the last 6 months, and one is the demonetization effect by our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi. Let us talk about Brexit and where is it now? How the UK is taking it.
I think Brexit was a shock for everyone. I think both the Remainers and Leavers were equally shocked. The Remainers expected to win, and the Leavers expected to lose, and it became the other way. So I think the reality is it's happened. We have to move on. Democracy in action. Recently, the UK Parliament has given power to the MPs to get on with the process of Brexit. I think, as with anything which affects the markets, anything which affects decision making, it has been factored in now. So people are moving on. There was 4 or 5 months of uncertainty. Now people are moving on. Decisions are being made. I think in the context of India, I think it's a great opportunity. I think in the context of India, it means that the UK will look for trading partners outside the European community. And that means India stands right at the front of the list of trading partners to do business with, both in terms of exporting services and importing services. So in that context, I think Brexit will be a great opportunity for other nations looking to do business with the UK and the UK's ability to do business elsewhere. Irrespective of my political views, I think one has to move into the future. In the past, I may not have been supportive, but there is no alternative now. So move on, and I think the opportunities will present themselves. It's a function of how well people want to adopt them, or how slow people are in accepting the reality of the new norm. In terms of demonetization, I think it was a very risky move by Modi, and again, I'm no politician, and I think there was a lot of discomfort in India. There was a lot of unfortunate incidences. People were unprepared. And I understand the logic of not telling people, but I also understand the difficulty and hardship people went through in villages where there were not enough branches and there was a cash tightness. But again, you cannot rewind the clock and move on with what you have. what it has presented India is an absolute opportunity of financial superiority in technology. The ability to move that many people away from cash into digital money is unprecedented.
As you mentioned, 600 million people.
Absolutely. 600 million people will be moving into the ability to pay, receive and make payments without using currency. Now that can happen in a number of ways. There may be an opportunity for debit cards and credit cards. I suspect not. I suspect the Indian population will quickly adopt the technology that they have so readily adopted over the last 10 years, which is mobile phones. With nearly 1 billion mobile phones in India, it is obvious for the average user to skip credit cards and debit cards and do what India has done so effectively over the last 15 years, is leapfrog technology. So they will leapfrog debit cards and credit cards and go straight to mobile payments. Now, in the context of the global market, having 600 million new users come into a sector ready-made is unprecedented again. And I think that leads to lots of opportunities in both developing new solutions and for new businesses to support the citizens of India.
How do you see, if we are specific to students, especially the engineering students, how do you see them as taking on this opportunity?
I think there's a number of ways, and I talked about it earlier when I was at your campus. I think it's around how they look at the cycle of process of money, of receiving money, of paying money, of giving money, of paying for goods, of buying goods, of borrowing money. And I think students are, we've all been students. It's a tough time, and we're always poor, and you always needed access to money. And I think this takes on that personal aspect. But from an engineering perspective, I think if you look at the computer science students we spoke to today, some of them will be thinking of clever and more unique ways to make that process more efficient, more secure, more simplified. Now, there's a number of easy areas where people are beginning to work on Bitcoin technology and cryptocurrency. Digital money will require effective authentication. Bitcoin does that very well.
Do you think Bitcoin has been able to make
I think it's now it's forced behavior in India. You'll have to make digital currency more effective. Right. And I think one of the routes has been around using blockchain technology to do independent authentication, and cryptocurrency's basis is on that. So I think there will be an economy developing probably sooner than other parts of the world where people will adopt better authentication methods, because there's always a risk with digital money. Ironically, we seem to be more willing to hand over cash to individuals than trust machines, where it should be the other way around. We should trust machines. However, for authentication, to avoid computer crime, cybercrime and hacking, etc., I think cryptocurrency will become quite an important dynamic. The other dynamic, of course, is payment processes. How do you process payments on the mobile, and what kind of norms and modules come up? And I think that process, from an engineering perspective, both the logistics of managing that money flow, the certification of the money flow, and the processes will become great opportunities.
That's well said. So, to a very different question. How do you build, businesses of impact than businesses of money, as you mentioned in your talk today? I would like a little more on an elaborative answer on that. What is your exact thought?
I've written a lot about impact investing, and I've talked a lot about impact environment as a whole. There's a very distinct difference between philanthropic investment and impact investment. Philanthropic investment is around participating in non-government organizations or charities to help them develop solutions.
Non-profit foundations.
Non-profit foundations. But impact investment in itself is very different. It is around how you drive impact to the community, how you affect people's well-being, health or education, while investing in an organization which by its nature is profitable and generating value. That has an interesting dynamic in terms of the behavior of impact investors. They need to make sure they get the balance right between investing versus doing good. You can do well and do good, and it's that balance.
And you have investors for both the categories.
I think you have investors both categories, and people need to know how to behave. The worst thing is to have impact investors who behave like private equity, and they will change, they will affect the entrepreneur quite negatively. Impact investors are those who sit back and say, yes, they want a financial return, but they also value the qualitative. So the definition has to be very clear at the outside. What is success? What is the criteria of success? And what is the outcomes? Too many impact businesses don't have clear outcome measurement. Therefore, it's very difficult for them to identify what difference they've made. So once you have a real understanding of outcome behaviors, it becomes a good relationship. The investor knows what they're investing in, both the qualitative and the quantitative outcomes.
You've always believed in creating value. You always right from your times when you were a journalist. You were writing as a columnist with Financial Times. So how do you see the Make in India campaign set up by the Prime Minister? Do you see more British people, more British businessmen planning to invest in India and manufacture?
I mean, in the past, when I was a columnist briefly for the Financial Express, and I spoke about it then while I lived in India. But I think it's a question of confidence, and at the time I wrote a great piece about social confidence.
Right.
It's sort of national confidence. It's the ability for people to accept that homegrown products are good.
Right.
And it's a historic thing. It's always been the case. It was the same thing in Europe when, in the 50s and 60s, people were having products brought in from overseas because there was no domestic capability.
Right.
And the same principle is in India. India suffers quite badly of a lack of local product innovation and development because the service economy is the best thing here. The mantra here is service economy, immediate cash access, rather than product development and a product economy. However, I think the more focus there is on manufacturing, on homegrown intellectual property.
Frugal engineering.
Frugal engineering, it's interesting, but you've got to be careful because frugal engineering is a phrase which I have problems with because frugal engineering could be very inefficient engineering and not understood, not scalable, becomes almost a cottage industry. The aim is to make sure the engineering is relevant for India and the product is relevant for India. The world is very ubiquitous at the moment in terms of product sets. So as a youth growing up in India's experience of social media is very similar to the US. Therefore, as products come about, the necessity to isolate them for India becomes less and less relevant. What becomes more relevant is understanding India itself better. Unfortunately, the challenge in India is things like the urban-rural divide. If you're developing a product for India, do you understand what India means in the context of the developer? If the developer lives in Bangalore, studies in Bangalore, grows up in Bangalore, has a professional career in Bangalore, how do they know what a product is required for someone who lives in Jharkhand?
Right.
And I think that is a challenge, like anywhere else in the world. Understanding truly what India as a whole needs is very difficult. And I think, therefore, the innovation challenges become very urban-rural, metro-rural, wealthy, not so wealthy. And I think that's a bigger challenge in India. So when the Prime Minister and the team here talk about Made in India, they kind of need to be very clear that Metro India may never adopt the products that rural India would adopt, and we all know why. Different reasons, different infrastructure, different dynamics, different wealth.
Right.
A product which is relevant for rural India, where there's bad infrastructure or low power availability, low Wi-Fi or technical availability, was fantastic. That product is not relevant for Central Delhi.
There's a lot of migration happening in India from rural to urban. I think we'll be a very big urban population.
At the moment, 31% of India is urbanization.
Right.
And that's of 1.2 billion people. That's a lot of people in urban India.
So do you see it as a threat to innovation, or you see it as an opportunity?
I think it's an infrastructure challenge. We were talking earlier about the timelines involved in India. People always complain about India infrastructure taking long, but it's a big country. It's 1.2 billion people. It will take time. The timelines for road development, timeline for construction, for power, it should be measured in decades because that's how long physically it will take. Therefore, the challenge is not an acute one, but it's an interesting one in terms of how you identify how this population, urbanization, will develop. I think it's important because necessity is a mother of invention. With 31% urbanization, there will be challenges. There will be very first world challenges in a developing country like India, which we still call it developing even though it's growing. But there'll be very much first world challenges which will be in the city, and they may be around technology, maybe around hardware, maybe around Wi-Fi, maybe around renewable energies, internet.
Wi-Fi,
The same challenges don't exist in rural India. They have much more basic challenges yet. And that may well be, as we experience some of it today, they may well be on road infrastructure, rail infrastructure, power infrastructure. There's less of a driver in rural India for renewable power, but just power. So I think we live in two worlds in India. And I think a mistake the government could make is to forget that. I appreciate the industry, I appreciate what the government is aspiring to do, but I think the government is guilty, as in other countries, but India more so than anything, to try to make it a vanilla one solution when it's not. India is two Indias, and I'm always telling people, we're sitting in this wonderful hotel, this is not India. If you do the demographic dynamics of India, this is not India. Yet we will live in this bubble. And that is a danger. The danger is that the politicians and the business people try to focus development and innovation on the bubble, which is fine if you're doing it from a financial point of view, not if you're doing it from an impact point of view.
Great. What are your thoughts, Dan, on capacity building and skill development?
This is one of my favorite subjects. I mean, I talked about it and looked at it and been in business globally around skills development.
Yes. One of your business has been...
Yeah, very much around skills. Yeah. And this is around the gap globally around employability, about the inability for educational institutions to roll out individuals which are qualified for the base job. Even in countries like in the UK and the US, 40% of graduates are doing undergraduate jobs because they're unable to demonstrate that they have the skills to do the base requirement. That skills gap is even more acute when the base education is poor. If the base education, and for that I'm talking the base literacy, maths, languages, simple critical thinking is missing, it's very difficult for an economy or an industry, and particularly employers, to move forward and not have to retrain. And one of the challenges in skills education is the pressure put on employers to do the job of the government. And it's frustrating, and the employers complain, but ultimately they run big training groups. And when I had a business in India, we were always training our inbound new recruits. And you'd think you shouldn't have to if India is boasting that it has 751 universities, that if it has 800,000 engineers coming out every year, you shouldn't have to do retraining, but you do, because the quality of education is dispersed. There's great institutions, there's poor institutions, the certification is not authenticated, it's not independently validated, so there's no real assessment of what the individual certificate represents, and therefore as a result you have skills mismatched with employment opportunities, and you have the inability to deliver skills. One of the companies we mentioned earlier, Youth for Work, is helping by delivering assessment for individuals, so when they are trying to get the skills they need, they know exactly which skills they need for the employability that it drives.
It's a good match, it's the right match, so you don't waste time, yours and mine and others.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. How do you see employment in India rising, getting better?
At the moment, from my understanding, unemployment rate, or the recorded unemployment rate, is about 10.1%. And I think what happens is economies go through cycles, and there's a lot of statescraft in companies building economies, there's politics involved, but ultimately entrepreneurship, I always feel, is a great source of employability. It creates jobs above and beyond what the government does and what national infrastructure does. I think the ability for entrepreneurs to create employment is fantastic, and that is primarily for new sectors, new industries, above and beyond infrastructure. There is big infrastructure projects in India around power, around healthcare, around core education, around the road infrastructure, but the employability around technology is remarkable. When I started in my first business in India in the BPO industry, there was no BPO industry. Now we have millions of people in that industry. Same with technology, and that 20 years ago one would argue, how much could that make a difference? But it has made a tangible difference in employability, and new people have been into the industry and trained. I think that's what the government needs to do, seed new industries. There are industries which are globally emerging, which gives you a benchmark.
Like, what do you say?
I mean, if you look at artificial intelligence, if you look at digital monies, and I think that, because globally they're starting at the same time, it's a great opportunity for India to jump on them right at the beginning, thereby become global experts.
And technology is changing very fast, so how do you counter that challenge?
I think we kid ourselves that we have challenges. The children and the youth in India are no worse off than children around the world in terms of understanding technology, adopting technology, be able to participate in development of technologies. I think there was a statistic recently that in Silicon Valley 30% of all engineering developers are Indian. So there's no lack of skills in India. It's ability to focus and develop homegrown technologies and build up that industry.
You've been quite bullish in your conversations on experiential learning.
Yeah.
Experiential learning versus education.
Yeah.
The structured education. What are your thoughts?
I think it goes back to the skills gap. It goes back to the ability for individuals to leave an education environment with something which is relevant for the wider world.
Right.
And I think people forget that people who go through education have a latent intellect, and it can be badly represented to the world, or it could be badly tapped outside their institution. Therefore, they may leave an institution with a great qualification, which isn't naturally vocational. So they may think they can't use their skills when they can. And I think the more experience individuals have of using their intellect, the better, be it through internships, be it through really understanding your assessment criteria, be it working with mentors or having institutions like Chitkara who get people working in incubators. That is all good experience for the greater world.
You are a multi-talented personality. You love photography. You are a sportsman, and you're a wonderful father. You raised 3 wonderful boys, and while having your family duties and responsibilities on the side, you have your own passion, your own goals of business, and your empire is growing up, and so a lot of things come one's way. And how do you keep up your hobbies intact, your love for your passion of your karate? Can you talk about that?
I think it's about finding time, and it's never easy. You travel a lot, but you try to spend as much time as you can. A few years ago I took up cycling, and again it's trying to find the time, incrementally taking some time out. Similar with karate, it's taking time out and getting hurt in the process of doing it. And I think it is difficult, and I'm not the best advocate for this or an example of this, but finding time in your work life to do more outside work is really healthy. I think, and it's difficult for different generations to do that effectively. I think the younger generations are much more effective than I am or have of finding that balance.
How do you see 3 young boys growing up, and how do you see life ahead with them as friends, as a father, as a mentor?
I think it's the same for all of the youth at the moment. I think they're going through a massive evolution in terms of how children and the youth, boys and girls, are growing up. They are much more connected as individuals, globally, through social media, through their own network, through their technology adoption. I think technology has been a major driver in terms of how children are growing up. Access to information, immediate access to information, means that the engagements that they have amongst themselves, amongst their peers, with their teachers, with their parents, is radically different. And therefore the engagement will naturally be between parents and children will be quite different now, because the base information requirement is no longer there. They can get that from Mr. Google. It's more about discussion, and I think my guidance to teachers and my guidance to administrators and colleges is change the way you teach. You have to avoid teaching the rote learning. You have to avoid teaching the structured information sharing. It's more about discussion. That's how we'll get the best out of the youth. If there's more discussion about their views and opinions, more participation on how they think they can affect the future, not just a regurgitation of facts. There's no reason why Google shouldn't be allowed in exams, because all of us in this room, all of us in the lecture theatre today can answer those questions very simply.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not really learning. Some of rote learning is fine. It engages parts of your brain which are very relevant to learn, and that's useful, be it from Google or from the library, and that's useful to learn things. However, as a process of intellectual debate, that's less relevant whether we all know a particular fact. It's more relevant to what that means and how that affects life.
You focused a lot and you stress a lot on values and culture building, especially culture building in teams and startups. Yeah. You really stress on startups having good teams. Yeah. And it's a continuous investment. Yeah. So how do you see the future of startups in India?
I think India is going through a great evolution. I mean, it goes through different evolutions, and driven by political dynamics, driven by cultural dynamics, social media, global stories, e-commerce being an example, outsourcing being an example, education, edtech being an example. I think India, the startup story continues. I mean, every time I come to India, I see new vibe, new energy, new environments like the incubator that you're running. That's very useful. I mean, those incubators were not here a few years ago, so that creates an ecosystem. It's very important. Not all of them will succeed, But that's useful because the failures will breed other successes. And I think that's the more you have in the ecosystem, the more at the base, the more the environment, the more the acceptance. In the session we had today, more than 40% of the students stood up and said they want to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
I think 10 years ago it would have been 20%, and
Right.
30 years ago probably 0%. That is a reflection of social confidence. That's the ability of individuals to say, yes, I can. And I think that's all it takes. It doesn't mean everyone's going to be a success.
determination,
Yeah,
confidence.
it's determination. It doesn't mean everyone's going to be a success, and
Yeah.
nor will they, nor we know statistically they won't be. But the fact they can step out, the fact they can go forward and create something, that passion, to tap that passion is very powerful. And it's difficult not to admire those individuals, particularly with all the challenges they have in India.
Perfect. So Dan, it's a pleasure talking to you. We'll request you for one good message to the youth of our country.
I think India has so much to offer. The potential in terms of the industries, the sectors, the passion that the youth have here to solve the problems they face themselves creates the market. Don't go looking for markets when it's on your doorstep. And I think that will drive behavior, will drive engagement, and I think will drive massive adoption, both from the stakeholders of the company, of the business, and for the individual.
It is a pure pleasure having you
My pleasure, thank you.
with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you
over.
very much. Thank you. Take care.